Good morning, and the committee will come to order. In recent years, digital assets have emerged to become an important part of our global financial system. Today, we will discuss how our tax code can provide a clear framework to ensure American leadership in this innovative industry. But we're not starting from scratch. Over 2 years ago, this committee laid the groundwork for a strong bipartisan foundation when Ranking Member Wyden and I jointly released a public request for information on how Congress should address the tax challenges and opportunities presented by digital assets. The robust input we received from stakeholders showed significant uncertainty exists, and Congress should update our tax code to provide clear and durable rules of the road. Since receiving that input, the market cap of digital assets has continued to rapidly increase, and additional questions have been raised by industry. Many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle understand these challenges and have put in significant work to develop thoughtful solutions. This summer, Congress passed and the President signed into law the Genius Act, which establishes a first-of-kind framework for payment stablecoins, an important step for the American leadership in financial innovation and economic opportunity. As Congress considers additional steps to further develop the digital asset architecture, the tax treatment of these assets and transactions is a necessary part of that fabric. Currently, our tax code does not provide straightforward answers for many digital asset transactions. Whether someone is buying a cup of coffee, donating to a charity, investing, lending, mining, or staking. Without clear tax rules, taxpayers are left with many unanswered questions, and individuals, businesses, and our country's finances bear that burden. Lingering tax uncertainty also makes the U.S. a less attractive place to do business and invest and hurts tax compliance. The U.S. must not fall behind in this rapidly growing market. It should be a leader in digital asset development. Recognizing these challenges, the Trump administration has rightly prioritized the examination of the current tax treatment of digital assets. During his first week in office, President Trump issued an executive order recognizing the crucial role the digital asset industry plays in U.S. innovation. In addition, the critical role that it plays in economic development and international leadership. That executive order also established a President's Working Group on Digital Assets Markets, which published a report titled Strengthening American Leadership in Digital Financial Technology. The report includes tax legislative proposals regarding the mark-to-market election, trading safe harbors, securities loans, and the wash sale and constructive sale rules for fungible digital assets. The report also includes tax recommendations dealing with payment stablecoins. These are novel and complex topics, and I thank our witnesses for being here today to help us better understand them. I look forward to learning from you and hearing how Congress can take steps to develop proper rules of the road for digital asset taxation to ensure U.S. leadership in this rapidly evolving industry. As we will hear from our witnesses, the cryptocurrency ecosystem is diverse in its products and functions, and our tax code must appropriately adapt to reflect a more comprehensive and durable approach. I trust the bipartisan foundation that this committee has built will result in solutions that meet that challenge. Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and colleagues, 10 hours into a government shutdown, and Americans are wondering this morning how they're going to afford groceries, pay rent, and even cover the transportation costs they face today. The Republican response to them? Silence. With so many people being hurt by the shutdown and desperately worried about the hardships to come, I think it is so unfortunate the Republicans are making their warped priorities clear. I'll start with a few facts. The federal government is shut down while Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. Rather than going forward in good faith, the administration is engaged in hostage-taking, threatening people's livelihoods, and just about everything except finding a solution. Republicans don't make any real effort to hold Trump to his promises or to stick up for federal workers. They just rubber stamp whatever chaos the Trump administration inflicts on the country. That's no matter the cost. So millions of Americans now are facing a huge increase in their health care premiums. This is the real world of the suffering we're seeing this morning. The Trump administration and Republicans won't lift a finger to help them. Resolving this shutdown and getting our fiscal house in order really ought to be the top focus now of the Finance Committee. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a single hearing on the $5 trillion tax bill that was passed a few months ago. Biggest bill in history, committee with jurisdiction, not going to discuss it in a bipartisan way. On top of that, the economy is showing real signs of weakness. Jobs are fewer, prices are higher. Millions of Americans are about to get clobbered with those health care costs. Now, I do agree with the concept of working on crypto's treatment under the tax code. It's a worthy subject. I fought back against proposed rules that went too far towards dictating what code-independent developers, not exchanges or brokers, would be forced to write. But in my view, and I say that this morning to my colleagues on all sides, there's a pretty long list of major issues and problems this committee has got to look at first. As for the topic at hand, there are a lot of questions that deserve candid consideration when it comes to crypto and taxes. Right now, there's a severe lack of certainty and clarity on how tax rules apply to crypto. That's bad for just about everybody except the tax cheats. One of the effects of all that uncertainty is a big increase in the tax gap, the taxes that go unpaid every year. Back in the first Trump administration, the IRS Commissioner Charles Rettig sat in this room and testified that the real gap might be double the official estimate because of the shadowy rules around crypto. That would make the tax gap almost $1.4 trillion per year. Goes without saying, if the U.S. actually collected the taxes individuals and corporations owed, that'd go a long way to fixing our fiscal challenges. So there are a lot of other issues to consider. This is a new and rapidly transforming industry. It raises new questions all the time, including how to treat crypto firms that, for all intents and purposes, are basically like sports gambling companies. The Senate needs to handle these issues carefully, take the time to get it right. That'll be a challenge, and I certainly hope that the Senate looks at this in a bipartisan way. Right now, what's most important is that we stand up for people who are suffering today, because they're all over America this morning. That's what they're thinking about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And although this hearing is about crypto, I have to respond just briefly to the effort to relitigate the one big beautiful bill. The bottom line is that yesterday the Republicans voted to keep the government open, and the Democrats insisted on over $1 trillion of new spending in order to do so. We will continue having that debate, but today we're going to go forward with our witnesses and discuss the issues that we deal with regarding taxation of digital assets. In a moment, our witnesses will share their opening statements. Before doing so, I will provide a short introduction of each witness. Mr. Soman Sato is the Director of Policy at Coin Center, a leading nonprofit research and advocacy organization focused on cryptocurrency and decentralized technology. Prior to joining Coin Center, he held senior roles in both the public and private sectors, focusing on the legal and regulatory treatment of cryptocurrencies. Ms. Kramer is the founding member of Ask Kramer Law LLC. Previously, she served as a partner at McDermott, Will, and Emery for 30 years. Ms. Kramer has also authored a 2-volume, 4,000-page reference, Financial Products, Taxation, Regulation, and Design, now in its 4th edition. Mr. Slotkin is the Vice President of Tax at Coinbase. He took on his role at Coinbase following a career of nearly 25 years at the General Electric Company and as a tax lawyer at a number of global U.S. law firms. And Ms. Nellen serves as the chair of the American Institute of CPA's Digital Assets Task Force. She is also a professor at San Jose State University, teaching graduate-level tax courses, and directs the university's High-Tech Tax Institute and Blockchain Tax Conference. She was previously with the IRS as a revenue agent and lead instructor, and also in private practice. We will begin with Mr. Somansato's opening statement, followed then by Ms. Kramer, Mr. Slotkin, and Ms. Nellen. Mr. Somansato.
Chairman Crapo, Ranking Member Wyden, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Jason Somansato, and I am the Director of Policy at Coin Center, an independent nonprofit focused on the public policy issues facing cryptocurrencies. Coin Center is not a trade association. We do not represent any particular company, sector of the ecosystem, or crypto network. Our work is focused on informing policymakers how best to approach this new technology in a way that upholds constitutional principles, safeguards civil liberties, and fosters innovation. On today's topic, Coin Center has long called for sensible and fair tax policy that protects the rights of individuals to build, use, and benefit from open blockchain networks. We do not seek special treatment, but rules that align crypto transactions with comparable activities under the law. This hearing presents an important opportunity to address the current obstacles to that equal treatment. But why act now? Since the introduction of Bitcoin in 2009, millions of people, including millions of US taxpayers, have used open blockchain networks to send peer-to-peer payments, to earn rewards, and to conduct a wide variety of other activities. These networks are not going away, as evidenced by the billions in value transferred over them each day. And there now is increasing demand to transition significant portions of the economy to blockchains, just as so much of commerce moved onto the internet starting in the 90s. Yet the tax treatment of crypto transactions is often uncertain, impractical, and in some cases fundamentally misaligned with well-established principles of tax law. The resulting burden falls most heavily not on institutional players, but on individual users and new market entrants, those least able to afford specialized tax advisors and expensive accounting software. Sensible tax reform is essential for U.S. competitiveness and ensuring that these networks are built with democratic values. Whenever an American Bitcoin miner or Ethereum staker suffers unnecessarily complex tax treatment, whenever an American Solana user faces accounting headaches or invasive surveillance, we are not merely inconveniencing a handful of today's nerds and early adopters. We are ceding the future of financial infrastructure to rival nations promoting closed and surveilled network models. Congress can offer a better alternative, one rooted in clarity, fairness, and the rule of law. So how do we improve the current tax environment around crypto? My written testimony focuses on 3 recommendations that Coin Center has championed for years. Let me briefly explain each. First, the IRS treats cryptocurrency as property. That means every time a user sends crypto, even to buy a coffee or pay a fractional transaction fee, they trigger a complex taxable event. For individual users, this is comparable to triggering a tax obligation every time you send an email or a text message. In 1997, Congress saw a similar issue with foreign currency and created a $200 de minimis exception. A comparable fix for crypto would go a long way toward enabling everyday use without sacrificing compliance. Second, we urge Congress to clarify that block rewards, the newly created tokens earned by miners and stakers for validating transactions, be only taxed upon disposition. IRS guidance incorrectly treats these tokens as gross income upon receipt. The reality is that these tokens are not received, but are instead created property, just as crops grown by farmers or apps coded by developers. The current IRS approach leads to phantom income and misaligns crypto with other taxpayer-created property. Congress should clarify that block rewards are only taxed when sold or exchanged. That change would align the law with economic reality and prevent honest taxpayers from being penalized for participating in network consensus. Third, the 2021 Infrastructure Act extended Section 6050I to crypto. This provision now requires anyone receiving over $10,000 in crypto to collect and report detailed personal information about their counterparty in a peer-to-peer transaction. Coin Center has challenged the constitutionality of this provision in federal court, and we urge Congress to repeal or amend it to avoid chilling legitimate private uses of this technology. The promise of cryptocurrency lies in its ability to empower individuals and enable open, decentralized innovation. But that promise can't be realized if the tax code places unfair burdens on the very people working to build and use these tools in good faith. Congress has a critical opportunity to modernize the tax code, protect everyday users, and ensure the United States remains a leader in this fundamental technology. Thank you.
Ms. Kramer.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to join you for this important discussion. By way of background, my law practice relates to financial products and derivatives and trading markets. I wrote the treatise on financial products. I was an adjunct professor at Northwestern Law School for 20 years, and I've conducted workshops for IRS financial product specialists for over 20 years. And it's my privilege to share with you my views. The existing tax framework set out in the Internal Revenue Code is flexible enough to accommodate digital assets, with some clarification and residual gaps filled in by Congress. Yes, digital assets are a new asset class with unique transactions never contemplated before. But this is not the first time that a new asset class is available for trading, nor the first time that the code has been applied to a totally new asset class. In moving forward, we need to keep in mind the precedent we're setting for the next new asset class and the next one after that. As Jason said, the IRS has repeatedly confirmed in pronouncements that digital assets are property, and the tax code determines tax character, timing, and sourcing for property. Tax character, it's either capital or ordinary. Tax timing, it's going to be based on your accounting method and when you have dominion and control, that means the free use of the property. And source, geographic location, where the services are performed or the income is earned. As property, many digital assets also fall into the category of commodities, while a few of them are securities. And although stock and securities is defined in the code, without a code definition of commodities, the IRS has generally deferred to the CFTC as to what constitutes a commodity. We really need a code definition. So let's turn out to mining and staking rewards. The code tells us that gross income is income from whatever source derived. To have gross income, a taxpayer must have an accession to wealth that is clearly realized and over which the taxpayer has complete dominion and control. What does this have to do with miners and stakers who receive rewards for adding blocks to a chain or for validating transactions? Well, under current tax law, their rewards are taxable upon receipt once they have dominion and control. The awards are compensation for services. When a miner or staker adds a block to a blockchain or validates a transaction and subsequently sells those rewards, the second transaction is a separate taxable sale. There have also been questions about applying the mark-to-market rule under Code Section 475 to digital assets. At present, actively traded digital assets are commodities for 475 purposes. But how is actively traded defined and which digital assets meet this definition? Congress needs to provide guidance so taxpayers can properly elect into mark-to-market as either commodity dealers or commodity traders. The scope of actively trading is unclear, and Congress needs to clarify when digital assets are commodities within the current code and what actively traded means. If digital assets are a new category, then it should be made elective for both traders and dealers to provide tax parity between digital assets and all of the other commodities. Let's finally consider the appropriateness of a de minimis exception. Precedent for a de minimis exception is available for personal use foreign currency transactions. The rationale given for granting the foreign currency exemption does not apply to digital assets because people don't need to pay for a cup of coffee with crypto, while tourists abroad have to buy things in the local currency. A de minimis exception won't solve the record-keeping and reporting obligations because taxpayers still need to keep track of all of their transactions in order to demonstrate their compliance. And if Congress decides to provide a de minimis exception, it would be providing a tax subsidy to encourage crypto investments. So the bottom line is that Congress needs to provide taxpayers with guidance as to the taxation of digital assets. Clarifications needed in key areas and gaps need to be filled. But Congress has the Internal Revenue Code to build off of, and it's a great framework to work off of. And the IRS is not in a position to handle these issues themselves. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for letting me tell you what I think about cryptocurrency.
Thank you very much. Mr. Slotkin.
Chairman Crapo, Ranking Member Wyden. Chairman Crapo, Ranking Member Wyden, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify. My name is Lauren Slotkin. I'm the Vice President of Tax at Coinbase, America's largest digital asset exchange. The digital asset market is no longer small or experimental. It's a $4 trillion, that's with a T, global economy, one that Americans use every day, whether to instantly send money across borders, to secure global financial networks, or to store value. Other countries are writing clear rules to attract this activity. But here in America, our tax code still treats digital assets as generic property, as if nothing had changed in over a decade. That gap creates confusion, discourages investment, and risks driving jobs and capital offshore. The guiding principle is simple: parity with traditional finance. The same tax rules should apply to the same economic activity, whether it involves commodities, stocks, or tokens on a blockchain. Right now, that parity does not exist. The lack of tailored rules has real consequences. One is inconsistent outcomes. Take staking, earning rewards for securing a network. Two people can do exactly the same thing, one through a US-based service, the other through a service overseas. Today, the first may be told that their rewards are subject to withholding taxes, while the second may not. Taxpayers should not get different answers to the same question just because they clicked on a different website. Another friction is capital formation. Imagine a person that wants to lend digital assets and improve market liquidity. If they were lending stocks or bonds, that transaction would be tax-free under well-established rules. But with digital assets, this could be treated as a sale. The result? The deal is more expensive, or it doesn't happen at all. A loan is not a sale, and our tax code should reflect that. And then there's personal privacy. Picture an ordinary American using a stablecoin to buy a cup of coffee. Under today's rules, that small purchase must be tracked and reported on a tax form. Requiring taxpayers to monitor and document such routine payments is intrusive and inconsistent with any reasonable expectation of financial privacy. The Genius Act regulates that there is no gain or loss for the stablecoin. It's a payment tool pegged to the dollar. The tax laws need to mirror that approach. Very simply, Americans should not need a tax accountant to buy a cup of coffee. The U.S. is losing ground. Other jurisdictions have already written clear tax rules for digital assets. That means a business may choose to locate abroad instead of here. Along with the business go jobs, capital, and tax revenue, all because our rules aren't clear. These are not hypothetical problems. They're happening now, and they undermine our ability to compete globally. That's why my written testimony highlights 10 priorities for reform. Broker reporting that excludes stablecoins and de minimis transactions. Extending tax-free treatment to digital asset loans. Clarifying source rules for staking rewards. Creating a safe harbor for digital asset lending. Trading. Ensuring retirement funds and pensions are not penalized for staking. Modernizing grantor trust and partnership rules for exchange-traded funds. Establishing a mark-to-market election for dealers and traders in digital assets. And applying wash sale rules to digital assets as part of a crypto tax package because parity means no special loopholes. Many of these reforms can be advanced today through regulatory tools, notices, revenue rulings, private letter rulings, and regulations. We're encouraged by the strong signals for the administration, including their announcement just yesterday that they are prepared to act, and we thank them for their leadership. But legislation is the most durable, and it's time for Congress to act. And looking forward, blockchain itself can be part of the solution, tools that make reporting more accurate, less costly, and protective of taxpayer privacy. Let me stress again, these proposals are not about special treatment. They're about parity with traditional finance. The fact that our industry supports wash sale parity is proof that we're serious about integrity, compliance, and fairness. The stakes are high. Done wrong, tax policy will create confusion, higher costs, and capital flight. Done right, it will protect the tax base, enable innovation, and preserve America's role as a world financial leader. Senators, crypto is here for good, $4 trillion strong, and now is the time to bring our tax rules up to speed. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Ms. Nellen.
Good morning, Chairman Crapo, Ranking Member Wyden, and members of the committee. My name is Annette Nellen. I'm chair of the AICPA Digital Asset Tax Task Force and a professor and director of San Jose State University's Graduate Tax Program. On behalf of the AICPA, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to testify on the taxation of digital assets. Despite the growing importance of digital assets and the increasing number of taxpayers using them, there is still a lot of uncertainty and a lack of clarity when it comes to many digital asset tax issues. Since the initial guidance from the IRS in 2014, the number and types of digital assets and their uses has grown and continues to do so. Digital assets include not only Bitcoin, that was an initial focus of guidance, but also numerous cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, tokenized assets, wrap tokens, and non-fungible tokens or NFTs. This has further complicated the taxation of digital assets because some closely resemble securities, some resemble commodities, and others don't resemble either. Therefore, carefully defined terms will be critical in any extension of existing tax provisions to digital assets. For example, we recommend that mark-to-market accounting be extended to dealers and traders of digital assets under the Section 475 framework. The intent of mark-to-market accounting was to simplify tax compliance for assets with a value that can be readily determined, such as securities. There are many digital assets with values that are readily determined and actively traded on multiple digital asset exchanges. To extend mark-to-market accounting to dealers and traders of digital assets, Congress needs to know which digital assets would be eligible for such treatment and then specify the types of activities that would make a taxpayer a dealer in digital assets. For example, narrowly defining actively traded fungible digital assets as those traded on one or more domestic digital asset exchanges would treat digital assets similar to certain securities and commodities. This narrowly defined subset of actively traded digital assets could also be used for other code sections applicable to securities and commodities. Importantly, this standalone definition would circumvent the need to determine whether a specific digital asset is a commodity, security, or other type of asset. For example, Congress could leverage this definition when considering a safe harbor under Section 864 for digital assets. The legislative history of Section 864 indicates that Congress believed it would encourage foreign investment in the U.S. and would keep trading activity in the U.S. This intent would seem to apply to other investment assets, including digital assets. Another tax issue that needs to be resolved via legislation is application of the qualified appraisal exception for charitable contributions of certain digital assets. This exception assumes that certain types of assets have reliable and publicly available values. Therefore, they should not require the expense of hiring a qualified appraiser to determine the value of donated property. Publicly traded securities are among the few types of property available for this exception. Now, because not all digital assets are actively traded on digital asset exchanges, the appraisal exception should not be extended to all digital assets. An overly broad extension may lead to overvaluation of digital assets with speculative values. The qualified appraisal exception should be limited to actively traded fungible digital assets. This aligns with the intention and the benefits offered under the current exception for publicly traded securities, which is to make the charitable contribution process simpler and less costly and where any possible abuse is unlikely. These three issues do not reflect all digital asset tax issues that can create uncertainty for taxpayers and tax professionals. Some issues are more complex than others, and some have valid arguments on each side. And for some issues, a legislative rule is needed for consistency or to address areas where more than one possible tax interpretation exists. We have addressed additional tax issues in our written testimony. Ultimately, we seek guidance that provides clarity and certainty of the tax consequences and reporting obligations arising from digital asset transactions will improve the tax system, not cause people to avoid transactions that otherwise make financial sense, and lead to consistent application of tax rules among all taxpayers. The tax system benefits from clear laws, everyone plays by the same rules, and can meet their compliance obligations with confidence. In addition, tax administration is more efficient. This is what we are requesting when it comes to taxation of digital assets. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. And again, I want to thank all of our witnesses for your testimony. Your testimony, as well as your oral testimony, as well as your written testimony, shows just how complex this issue is and how critical it is that we get your expertise in getting it done right. I have just a couple, I have a lot of questions, but I'll just go into a couple of them. And first, Ms. Kramer, is for you. If I understood your testimony correctly, you said that you have some concerns about a de minimis rule, I'm not quite sure whether your concern was whether to have a de minimis provision or whether that we needed to get it exactly right. Could you explain what you were saying there?
In my written testimony, I did go to some length about it. The problem with a de minimis exception is that it is a way that there can be abuse and people can take advantage of it. That's really what the concern is. And so talking about setting a maximum number, having an income level maybe, having a maximum number of dollar amounts, whatever. And so if there is going to be a de minimis exception provided for digital assets, then it needs to be crafted in a way that is probably more specific than the current exception that we have for foreign currency.
All right, thank you very much. And Mr. Soto, you mentioned de minimis also. Do you agree with Ms. Kramer?
Our position is that a de minimis exception would make sense for this asset class. Ms. Kramer had mentioned in her opening statement the kind of difference with currencies where you're required to pay in a foreign country with that foreign currency. I'm not sure that's the policy justification that underlies a foreign currency exemption. To me, these assets, if you go back to the Bitcoin white paper, the concept here is to create a publicly available form of digital cash and to allow individual users to actually take advantage of what blockchains allow for, which is this peer-to-peer value transfer. You need to have a situation where the tax burden doesn't make it completely impossible to conduct transactions in that manner. And so I think there are ways to craft a de minimis exemption that would cover concerns about abuse. But I think, for example, just real quickly, like when you pay for a transaction, for example, in a stablecoin, you also have to pay like a fraction of a cent in the native asset as a transaction fee. And those like fractional cent transactions also are subject to the same tax reporting. And these are the types of difficult tax compliance requirements that make it nearly impossible for individual users to use the technology.
All right, thank you very much. And Mr. Zlotkin, you emphasized parity, and I agree with that. I'd like to ask you to just maybe explain in a little more depth why you believe parity is so critical, and add to that your final comment toward the end of your testimony that we need to have Congress get this right, not just continue to rely on administrative guidance from the IRS.
I have been a strong spokesman of financial parity because I think that this is a relatively new asset class. We shouldn't be distinguished or otherwise penalized compared to financial services. Is this on?
Now it is.
Just pull the mic a little closer. Maybe that'll help.
So we shouldn't be penalized compared to, there are a lot of rules that apply to financial services that do create clarity and durability, and those rules are not applicable to Coinbase and to other similar institutions. So I think financial parity is something that we've advocated very strongly. It puts us sort of in a level playing field with the rest of traditional finance. As to your second question about administrative guidance versus law, my own view is that the only durable way to create sort of a foundation for digital assets is to clarify aspects of the law that are unclear and put that in the code itself. Certainly we've approached the IRS, we've approached the Treasury, they've been very accommodating. In many instances, sometimes they've been inaccessible in prior years, but I think the only way to really create a durable system functionally to last as a real foundation is the law itself.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Nellen, would you like to comment on any of either the de minimis issue or on the parity issue or any other issue you think should be prioritized?
Yeah, just to note, on the issue of the parity, when you've got rules like for mark-to-market, lending, where you're referencing securities or commodities, without any specific rule where the digital assets fall, it can then fall upon a tax practitioner, often a non-lawyer, to figure out, might this digital asset fall into one of those categories? To avoid that, and also you end up with inconsistency as to the interpretation, if there was a category of digital assets that actively traded on a exchange would be added to those provisions, then we would have the definitive answer of, yes, I can identify this digital asset falls into that category. Then it does have consistency with securities, commodities, and certain digital assets.
Well, thank you very much. Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Nellen, thank you very much for repeatedly mentioning mark-to-market, because in our billionaire income tax legislation, which now has the support of 22 United States senators, that's one of the key concepts, and you're making it clear it is a regularized part of the tax code, and I appreciate it. Let me go to you, Ms. Kramer, on de minimis, because this is going to be one of the hotly debated aspects of this whole effort, and I want to make sure we're walking this through, carefully, so everybody gets a sense of where we are. So when you use a digital asset to make a purchase, you trigger a gain or a loss, just like if you sold stock. Congress creates the de minimis rule for foreign currency so that taxpayers aren't burdened with tracking gain on personal transactions in local currency abroad. Now, this is where it gets, I think, into the debate. It's been suggested that there be a similar exclusion for digital asset transactions subject to an annual cap. Now, my question is, even if there were to be a de minimis exclusion with a cap, would you still need reporting so that taxpayers know their gains on each transaction to make sure they don't get in trouble with the cap and that sort of thing?
They would need to keep track of the transactions in order to prove compliance, so that as a practical matter, it really wouldn't make a difference.
We're going to ask you some more questions about that in writing, because it strikes me that even if you go forward de minimis with a cap, there are going to be some other aspects to this issue. Let me ask you about mining and staking. If a business issues unrestricted stock for services, is that ordinary income on receipt?
For unrestricted stock?
Yeah.
It's income upon receipt.
Okay. How would this work if miners and stakers received unrestricted digital assets for validation, say, validation services?
Then if they don't have to pay tax upon receipt the way you would if you got unrestricted stock, then what happens is you don't have to pay tax unless and until you sell it. And you could donate it, you could bequeath it to your heirs. There's all sorts of ways that you would not pay tax on it if it wasn't taxed initially.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And Senator...
Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman. and I completely agree that this is a hearing about a novel and complex issue. listening to testimony, looking at the written testimony, it also strikes me as this is an issue that really should be completely nonpartisan. Not that there won't be some controversies as we start talking about the details of de minimis. I literally have a couple hours worth of questions here, and I'd love to assemble a group like this and probably a broader group to just go through. But first of all, as we approach this, I would like to, kind of like the medical profession, first do no harm. I'll just quick ask you, is there a particular thing that would do harm that you've been hearing? Just quick down the list. I don't want you to spend a whole lot of time on this. Is there something that we really ought to avoid? We'll start with you.
Yeah, I would say the current tax treatment of staking and mining rewards is what's doing harm, and that's one of the main things that needs to be corrected.
But it's happening right now.
Yes.
Yeah, but I'm saying if we would write something that would do harm. But basically all of you are in agreement, we've got to provide legislation to define these things, to provide clarity. So again, I think the opportunity here is, okay, what are those things that need to be defined? And I know a number of you got very specific suggestions here. I would want to find what does everybody agree on, isolate that, get those definitions in a piece of legislation, then we start haggling over the disagreements. But again, I first want to say, what would we do to really create harm? Ms. Kramer.
Well, that's a great question.
I try and have good ones.
Yeah, right. Of course, you asked me first. I would say that one of the things that you could do to avoid harm would be to make the clarification. To have harm would be to unintentionally provide tax subsidies for some people when other people don't get it. And so that's really the harm question. And so you have, the job you have is to work on making sure that if you're doing it intentionally.
So, Mr. Zlatkin, you provided, I think 10 recommendations. By the way, were you able to see each other's testimony before you came here today?
No.
Okay, I would suggest you read it, and then the question I'd like to ask for the record is, what, out of all the testimony, what do you all agree on, and where's the disagreement? But Mr. Zlatkin, do you have anything in particular that you think would do harm if we would put something in legislation?
Thank you, Senator. I think that my theme is that there's a lot of potential for over-reporting. We spend a lot of time on that, even in this discussion about de minimis and with stablecoins itself. There's an enormous potential. This is a democratized form of financial asset class where people can use things in ways that weren't done before. And there's a tremendous potential there for over-reporting and burdening the system. It's burdening the system for taxpayers, and it's burdening the system for the IRS. So let's take reporting today, and if you enhance this by over-reporting, by not including a de minimis rule, you're going to have billions of transactions that taxpayers are going to have to report, keep track of. I don't think most taxpayers are prepared for that result. It'll probably hinder the growth of the industry. It will also
when you talk about reporting, again, I want to always keep things as simple as possible. The whole blockchain is based on pretty complex computers, which we have now, so hopefully we could be able to use something like that. Ms. Nellen, representing the AICPA, I would ask you, same question in terms of, is there something that we would do that actually create harm, but also who else, we need all the stakeholders at the table here as you discuss, again, find out what are areas of agreement, what needs definition, how should you properly define it, then start working on the areas of disagreement. So I'd also ask you, who's not represented here? What stakeholders aren't here? But first of all, is there something that we would do that actually do harm?
The only thing I could think of that might do harm if there was some term added that wasn't clear enough, so it then caused people to not act or interpret it incorrectly. So making sure terms are well defined with the types of transactions that are going on today. So far as stakeholders, I think the folks that are involved, or taxpayers involved, range all over the board. They could be individuals with small investments that are doing all kinds of things, trying to stake, have no idea about record keeping, have no idea about tax consequences. You've got folks with more income engaged in these transactions. You've got large companies engaged in various transactions. And perhaps, what rule works for one might not be appropriate for another one. Because I think today there is a lot of confusion among a lot of individuals who everywhere from I thought I didn't have to pay tax until I cashed out at some point to I don't know how to keep records. And obviously that doesn't excuse them not paying their taxes, but they need some kind of workable guidance, awareness of tools. In fact, actually, I think even enacting legislation is another wake-up call to folks. Hey, you need to be paying attention to what you're doing has tax consequences and figure them out and deal with them.
So Mr. Chairman, again, I really appreciate you holding this hearing. I hope we can move forward in a very thoughtful way. Let's not do any harm. We've got to get this right. This is incredibly important. And I hope that people contact the committee. They've certainly offered to contact my office. If you're a stakeholder in this, contact us. Let's work through all these issues. Let's find those areas of agreement, and let's be very thoughtful. And again, Senator Wright, I don't think there's any reason for any partisanship in this whatsoever. And there may be some complex issues that need to work through. There'll be different opinions on that, but God, I just think this is a perfect opportunity to do something really important in a completely nonpartisan way. So again, I applaud the committee for doing this.
Thank you. Agreed. Senator Daines.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. It's a great topic today. Pleased for the witnesses that are here. Look, our country has played such an important role in the advancement of digital asset industry. However, the uncertainty our digital asset industry now faces risks chilling innovation here at home and displacing U.S. leadership in cryptocurrency abroad. This is a global race, and whoever goes the fastest is going to win. Without clear rules of the road, these taxpayers and innovators face ambiguity and are forced to rely on general tax principles and really guessing, as well as looking at sub-regulatory guidance. If we don't get our tax code right, we will lose our lead in this space. We're going to push jobs and money overseas, and we're going to stall growth in this very important industry. When I fought for permanency in the One Big Beautiful Bill, American leadership was one of the main motivators, removing the uncertainty of Washington, D.C. We won that battle a few months ago, and I'm going to ensure we win on this battle as well. More than 50 million Americans are invested in cryptocurrency. And as this number grows, the more important it becomes to deliver certainty and stability to the American people. And given the progress my colleagues in this Congress have made this year with passage of the Genius Act and the ongoing development of digital asset market structure legislation, this committee needs to do our part to address the tax side of the ledger. And that's why I've started working on a framework that will provide much needed clarity to protect American jobs, revenue, and competition. Mr. Zlatkin, what are the risks to U.S. leadership in the digital asset space if we don't provide tax clarity?
Thank you, Senator. There are a number of rules today or lack of clarity that shifts investment outside the United States. I'll give you two examples. One is we don't have clear rules on sourcing. Sourcing is determinative as to whether withholding tax apply to investors. Investors outside the United States don't know whether the source rules for staking or for digital asset lending are treated as foreign and domestic. I think we should implement a rule that we've recommended, which is that if you're a foreign person, it should be sourced according to foreign, and therefore you're not subject to withholding tax. Again, that lack of clarity shifts investments. People just don't do it. If you have a choice, you'll invest outside the United States.
And where would that investment go if this lack of staking clarity? Where's it going?
It goes, thank you, Senator. It goes to validators outside, for staking, validators outside the United States. For lending, it would go to counterparties that are non-American. Another example is asset management. We have the strongest asset management framework and system. New York is legendary for that. We've developed rules that encourage foreign investment into the United States. I think we made reference, my colleagues made a reference to that as well. We do not have a clear rule about the treatment we know securities and commodities are eligible for this exemption, so that if you use a U.S. asset manager, you're not subject to U.S. tax, but that's not true for digital assets. So I would strongly encourage this committee to consider legislation that would expand that to include digital assets, so that it's made clear that digital asset trading, lending through a U.S. asset manager is exempt from U.S. tax, similar to other asset classes.
Thank you. The SEC recently issued guidance allowing for exchange-traded products, ETPs, to stake the crypto they hold. This follows other regulatory efforts this year by the SEC to increase access to crypto for everyday investors through cryptocurrency ETPs. These regulatory developments will result in more American taxpayers holding investments in ETPs, which I commend. As popularity around crypto ETP products grows, so too does the imperative of providing clarity, certainty to U.S. taxpayers by ensuring our tax code accommodates this unique and innovative feature offered by crypto-focused products. For example, staking is a feature that underlies much of the value proposition for investing in proof-of-stake crypto and is an important incentive for investors. However, the current rules and limitations for grantor trusts do not contemplate novel concepts, such as the staking of digital assets, leaving many taxpayers relying solely on advice from well-meaning accountants as to whether these tax structures are viable investment vehicles in the first place. As a follow-up to you, Mr. Slatkin, given your expertise in digital assets, can you explain why it's important that any comprehensive crypto tax package that will cement U.S. leadership and innovation in digital assets provides certainty and clarity around the use of structures like grantor trusts for crypto ETPs?
Thank you again, Senator. Totally endorse clarifying that. This is actually should be a relatively simple fix. Staking is
simple is not necessarily easy here in Washington.
That's true. So, in the sense that the grantor trust rules are designed to basically not apply tax as though it's just a look-through treatment. Staking itself presents unique aspects of validation that are automated, that most people think are sort of robotic and effectively easy to accomplish. If grantor trusts are not allowed to stake, then ETFs and ETPs will not have certainty for their investors that they can stake through these platforms. They'll be shifted elsewhere outside the United States, where these rules are actually pretty clear, where similar types of arrangements in Canada, for example, are made available. I think it's relatively clear that staking itself is sufficiently automated that grantor trust should be inclusive of these types of arrangements.
I'm out of time here. There's lots of more questions, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Chair Crapo and Ranking Member Wyden, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. Before I get into my questions, I do want to take a moment to address the federal government shutdown. While the topic of today's hearing is certainly important and I have questions for you, Congress should be focused right now on working together to find a bipartisan path to reopen the federal government, restore critical services for people, prevent health insurance premiums from doubling, and keep millions of people from losing their coverage and the care that goes with it. And so while I look forward to hearing more from our witnesses, I once again urge my colleagues to come together on a bipartisan basis for the American people. Now to my questions. Ms. Nellen, I voted for the Genius Act earlier this year in order to provide clear rules for the stablecoin industry that promote innovation and address national security issues. Looking ahead to other cryptocurrency issues, we need to continue to balance supporting the innovative U.S. industry with putting in place strong national security protections. For example, cryptocurrency raises important questions for our tax system. Cryptocurrency activities don't always fit neatly into existing law. This creates real uncertainty for taxpayers who are trying to follow the rules and for the IRS as it works to investigate criminal activity. So, Ms. Nellen, given the technical complexity of cryptocurrency and other digital assets, how can Congress and the IRS establish tax rules that both provide clarity to the U.S. industry and bolster the ability of law enforcement to go after criminals who use cryptocurrency for illicit activities?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Maybe two parts to that. So far as the compliance aspect, the IRS has provided a lot of guidance back in 2014 just by saying under the tax lot's property, because then we have a whole set of rules on property.
Right.
Though there are some unique things that happen with digital assets, a hard fork, an airdrop, staking, mining, that aren't really neatly fitting into existing guidance there. I think the recent guidance that came along with the broker reporting, where they clarified how we treat amount realized, how we treat basis. That's added clarity, and everybody can follow that and be consistent. So I think so far as calculating gains and losses on most transactions, the rules are fairly clear. When we get into other issues where you're trying to figure out, for example, a mark-to-market rule where it applies to securities and commodities, there's some people think, oh, all these things are securities, they fall under there. Well, that's not true, and it makes quite a burden to figure out if they do fall under there. You also run into inconsistency on that. Another one, I think, where it would be very helpful, there are people that donate, companies donating the very valuable Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin's gone up tremendously in value, and people think, I'll donate it, but they need to get a qualified appraisal if it's worth more than $5,000, and that's puzzling, and some people overlook that. And then, which means that they didn't actually get the donation deduction because they didn't follow the rules, which is really unfortunate.
Right.
To change the rule, make it very clear from Congress doing that just like publicly traded securities are a readily valued asset, I think if we could put in crypto that is listed on an exchange, that would really aid in the donation of those items without getting a qualified appraisal or even knowing if it truly is a qualified appraisal. There's a lot of rules on what makes something a qualified appraisal.
That is very helpful, and that actually gets to my second question. And in addition to wanting you to answer that question, Ms. Kramer, I was also going to ask you how the qualified appraiser requirement for cryptocurrency donations hold back the U.S. digital assets industry and nonprofits who accept cryptocurrency. So do you have more to add?
Well, the only thing that I would add to it is just to underline what was said, which is that it's a rule that doesn't need to be in place with respect to publicly traded products, and to treat publicly traded cryptocurrency as if it's a unique piece of artwork is really incorrect and unnecessary at this point.
All right, I appreciate that. Ms. Nellen, one more question about reporting requirements, which are one of the tools we have to track and prevent money laundering, to also make sure that we prevent sanctions evasion and other criminal activity. For decades, we've required businesses to report when they receive more than $10,000 in cash because large, untraceable transactions can raise red flags for criminal activities. As digital assets have become more widely used, they've introduced new challenges for law enforcement and tax administration, and that's why in 2021 I supported including digital asset reporting provisions in the bipartisan infrastructure law, requiring businesses that receive more than $10,000 in digital assets to report those transactions to the IRS, just as they would with cash. I know I am slightly over time, but can you briefly help us understand from your perspective, is it important that businesses report large digital asset transactions the same way large cash transactions are reported? And should Congress take steps to clarify that FinCEN should also receive the same information on digital asset transactions?
You're right. In the legislation of November 2021 already added digital assets to the code section that requires, and you're right, it's been around since 1984, that if you had more than $10,000 of cash collected from a merchant and one or more related transactions, had to file the Form 8300, then added that digital assets. So that the law is there, and the form actually is electronically filed. That I believe does go to FinCEN. I mean, it's actually on the FinCEN website to file those.
I think there's been some confusion, so I'll stop there and follow up with you. But
and also they're waiting for regulations on that 6050I.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to start by acknowledging how absurd it is that the Senate is convening to discuss anything other than this Republican shutdown and stopping Donald Trump from throwing 15 million people off their health care and more than doubling health insurance premiums for millions of Americans. Now, this hearing is supposedly about clarifying crypto's tax treatment. The context is that crypto holders aren't paying at least $50 billion per year in taxes that they owe. In theory, reform proposals could plug those crypto tax loopholes, which would be a good thing. But the proposals I'm seeing follow a familiar movie script. Industry lobbyists want special tax rules for crypto that will make crypto billionaires richer and give crypto an unfair advantage over other kinds of competing financial products. So I want to run through a few of those. Ms. Kramer, you're an expert on our tax law, so I've got some very simple questions for you. Let's start with a de minimis exception, a proposal that would allow crypto investors to avoid reporting income from crypto transactions under $300. If someone bought $300 worth of gold or $300 worth of Apple stock, would they be required to report any income they made from those transactions?
Yes, they would.
All right. If crypto investors get this de minimis exception, would they pay less in taxes than traditional stockholders for precisely the same kind of transactions?
They would pay less.
All right. The Joint Committee on Taxation estimates that this proposal alone would be a $5.8 billion tax boost for the crypto investors. So let's do a second one. An accountant who runs his own business, gets paid for updating books and records, just standard stuff. In the crypto world, miners and stakers get paid for updating the blockchain, crypto's financial ledger. The accountant, of course, pays taxes on their income when they receive it. But one crypto industry proposal would allow miners and stakers to delay paying taxes on the crypto they earn as income until they sell it, which could be many years later, if ever. Ms. Kramer, if this provision passed, would the miners and stakers effectively pay less in taxes than accountants, even when they are doing almost exactly the same work?
They would pay less.
So that's right. And the estimate here is it would be to the tune of about $4.3 billion, according to the JCT. So let's do a last one. Professor Nellen, you teach tax law. If a business receives over $10,000 in cash under current law, they have to submit additional reporting to the IRS and to FinCEN, in large part so the government can spot money laundering and criminal tax evasion. I think you were talking about that earlier with Senator Hassan, right?
Right.
Okay. So one proposal the crypto lobbyists have been floating would exempt crypto transactions from that requirement. Would that proposal make it more or less difficult for law enforcement to counter crypto money laundering and tax evasion?
Well, given the purpose of that provision, and it is already part of the law, it was added back in November 2021, but waiting for regs to make that effective, that is the purpose of it, to help identify where there is just a particular use of that. Some differences, though, between cash and crypto is, on a cash transaction, the customer is most likely right in front of you. That would not be the case. But
I understand that crypto has put out its reasons why it wants an exception. All I'm trying to get at each time is the crypto lobbyists are crawling all over Capitol Hill. And what are they looking for? They're looking for special rules for crypto, and not special rules that sometimes make it more expensive to operate crypto and sometimes make it less expensive, not special rules that sometimes makes it easier to track crypto transactions and sometimes makes it more difficult to track crypto transactions. It's that every one of these special rules tilts in the same direction, and that is for anyone investing in crypto to pay less than the equivalents elsewhere in the financial system, and in this case, to make it harder to track what's happening in crypto transactions if they are being used for illegal purposes. Look, I'm all for getting rules that are appropriately tailored, but I think we should abide by the same principle that we have used for decades in Congress, and that is same basic transaction, same kind of risks means we need the same kind of rules. And that should be true for crypto, just like any other financial product. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Young.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's very important. I know a number of our colleagues have brought up the government shutdown. We've had an opportunity recently. We'll continue to have opportunities to vote on a clean continuing resolution, we can immediately open government up again. So let's keep that in mind. This is a great hearing and an important hearing. This hearing on the taxation of digital assets comes at a critical time. Around the world, countries are grappling with how to regulate cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. These technologies, of course, hold promise for innovation and financial tools, but they also raise concerns, which have been articulated today by many of my colleagues, about transparency, compliance, and national security. The IRS's revenue ruling 2023-14 has highlighted some of these challenges. Many worry that the ruling is premature, difficult to administer, and inconsistent with longstanding tax principles. Taxpayers want to comply, but they need rules that are clear, practical, and fair. The President's Digital Asset Working Group report published in July has suggested that staking rewards should be taxed based on when there's a realization event, that is when those assets are sold or exchanged, not at the moment they're created. Mr. Samansato, if the current revenue ruling 2023-14 is inconsistent with these principles, should the IRS consider rescinding it and replacing it with guidance that defers taxation until disposition, just like with other types of property, until Congress weighs in?
Yes, we've called for that at Coin Center for several years since the guidance has been issued.
Thank you. Mr. Zlatkin, how does leaving revenue ruling 2023-14 in place affect the U.S.'s ability to attract innovation and capital in this space?
Thank you, Senator. So this is one of those examples where I think Ms. Warren is incorrect. I think that minors, people who self-create property, this ruling actually addressed this issue about whether tax should occur upon receipt or whether it should occur, as with other forms of inventory and self-created property, whether it should be when you dispose of it and monetize in the form of cash. There's an argument to be made, certainly, I think, and people have tried to make this argument, and have been unable to do so. The IRS has disagreed that should be upon when you monetize the investment. You should be taxed when you monetize it, not when you create the property. So I think rescinding it is extremely important. It will attract more mining activity into the United States. We discourage that by taxing parties only when they receive the mining rewards themselves or when they stake through validators within the United States.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Kramer, from a tax practitioner perspective, what could the consequences potentially be, positive or negative, if the IRS were to rescind the revenue ruling in the near term while Congress considers a more comprehensive framework?
Well, it would be different from what the interpretation of dominion and control is, where you have access to it. And the difference is, the issue is, as Mr. Slatkin said, that is it self-created property or is it income that you've earned for performing a service? And so that's really what the issue is here. And self-created property is very often something that you livestock, or you bake a cake or whatever. And the issue is the creation of adding the block or the getting the reward going to be treated as a service, providing a service. And that's really what the issue is.
Thank you, Ms. Kramer. Mr. Samansato, my time will soon expire here, but I know that this hearing is intended in part for us to begin to find a path forward that will help us integrate digital assets into our tax code in a way that provides certainty while encouraging innovation. Sir, while digital assets are evolving quickly and Congress risks being a step behind, from your perspective, what principles would you emphasize should guide us if we want to design tax rules that remain relevant and workable even as technology continues to advance?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple. I think one is putting kind of the individual user first, right? These networks are meant to be democratizing forces for transferring value between people. And a lot of the language that we use even up here is around like corporations and the indications of like how that impacts their tax accounting. So I think that's important. And then I think the other principle that's really important to keep in mind is distinguishing like how this technology works. For example, going back to the question of staking and mining rewards, right? A lot of times we've talked about like stock issuance or compensation, but these assets that are created by these rewards are not something that is being paid by some third party, right? Like this is a computer program that's generating these assets. And I think understanding that kind of foundational like how the technology works is really important to getting these questions right.
Thank you. That last bit will keep me thinking. Yes, Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Cassidy.
Mr. Somosato, Mr. Zlakin, I've been struck that people's medical data is commonly used by people who make billions, trillions of dollars, but their data doesn't contribute anything to their own financial welfare. Now, there is that indirect benefit of medical advance, but there's nothing like, my gosh, I had the one gene that was a cure for Alzheimer's, and somebody's going to do really well on it, and I get zilch. Now, we've seen litigation on this in the past, and now I think there's informed consent that your data can be used. But I think it would incentivize Americans and it would share the wealth if you could actually have a distributed ledger in which the monetary value of my contribution would accrue to me with financial advantage. Does that make sense, or am I speaking too kind of like highfalutin?
No, it makes sense.
Yeah. So how do you do that practically? How could you make it so that if Senator Crapo's lab test and clinical data were used to, or 23andMe, which has been monetized, but not accruing to the benefit of the person who's contributing the genetic material? How do we set up that system where it would accrue to my advantage as well? Not entirely, but to somewhat. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think as an initial matter, I would say it's an incredibly complex problem, but it's the type that developers in this.
Now, why would it be complex if we say, okay, everybody's data is going to be tagged with a wallet, and we're going to track it as to who is using it, and whenever it is used, there'd be some, system. For example, there might be 10% of all shares of a certain product, which will be distributed among those who contribute clinical data, that sort of thing.
So I think probably like one topic that comes to mind is you're putting people's health data on a blockchain, which is generally publicly available information.
Now, you wouldn't have to put their data on blockchain. You just put the wallet on blockchain. The data can be held in a repository that would be restricted access. But if accessed, bing, you add something to the wallet of the person whose data was accessed. Correct?
No, these are the exact types of like questions that I think some of the developers who are working on ideas like this are wrestling with, right? How do you then trust the repository that is issuing these tokens to like then transact in this? There's a lot of technologies around zero knowledge proofs that come into play. We like recently wrote a paper at Coin Center about dealing with digital identity on the blockchain and how like this can work from a technical perspective, but also some of the policy changes.
Now, will this be entirely worked out by the market or by private industry, or does it need enabling legislation?
I'd have to get back to you on that one. Like, I think specifically, like, again, digital identity is more of a proxy for maybe where you're thinking. It is one where we think there needs to be some policy movement to help create the environment. I would think it's probably similar.
So let me check. Does anybody else have a comment on this? Mr. Zlakin?
Thank you, Senator. I think you should come and work for Coinbase because I think you're full of brimming with ideas.
Wait, say that a little bit?
You should come and work with us at Coinbase on new technologies and adapting the blockchain. I would say this. I think your comment is really based on the promise of DLT, decentralized ledgers. We share that promise here at Coinbase, so I think we endorse that as well. And I think we can use that in the tax system as well. So there are blockchain. We have a tax system that is based on paper, on fax machines that is the 20th century, and we could collect and validate and ensure through smart wallets, through attestation tokens, the use of blockchain for a much more efficient tax system, and it very much is in line with some of the things you just described. We should be innovative. We should be thinking this is what America's about. So totally endorse that.
Did you have a comment?
Well, you're describing, I think, something similar to like a ASCAP royalty, where every time radio station plays a song, they have to pay a royalty. But the blockchain could help in tracking some of that, so payments go to the right person, plus protecting their private information.
Yeah. So now, what I'm a little bit concerned about is that you're suggesting that this might be the promise. That implies difficult to realize at this point in time. And yet, would it really be, or is it just a question of working it through to where we actually could democratize the financial benefit of medical advances to the people who are actually contributing the clinical information? Does that make sense? I mean, and this you may say, I don't know, you got to think about it, but it does seem like you put a bunch of smart people and you try and trace it out as a, do it for one person, then you scale it. Am I being too optimistic or not?
Well, I think a lot of people aren't thinking about the value of their information. I mean, we give a lot of information away all the time that perhaps has value to it.
We have a whole group at Coinbase called Base that works on initiatives that tries to effectively allow people to monetize their self-created property and things that you just described.
So I'm out of time, but if my staff is available 24/7, 365, and so if you all have thoughts as to how to do this, I'd appreciate this because I think this would actually, they say in our society currently you can make a killing, but you can't make a living. We need to make it so that everybody is enjoying the benefit of the data which they're contributing for others to make a killing. That's my thought. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to our panelists. I'd like to follow up on a line of questions that Senator Warren was working on, and I'll come to you, Ms. Kramer. So as Senator Warren noted, miners and stakeholders get paid for updating the blockchain. This involves validating transactions to ensure, for example, that a coin can't be spent twice at the same time. So it seems to me that it's reasonable to say that miners and stakers are performing an essential service. It seems like without them, the blockchain could quickly lose all integrity. They're performing an essential service. So my question is this: our tax system generally imposes a tax when someone provides a valuable service in return for compensation, regardless of whether they are, regardless of how they're paid. They pay taxes on that compensation. Am I correct about that?
Yes, you are. And the hotspot issue here is as to whether the staking and the stakers and the miners are performing a service, which is what it appears to be. They're following a protocol from the platform and from the blockchain platform, and so they're following instructions basically in order to perform a service.
Right. That's the way it seems to me, too, that they're performing a service, you get compensated for performing the service, and regardless of whether that compensation is in a dollar or a Bitcoin or whatever it is, that you pay taxes just like you. I mean, that's what accountants, that's how you get paid for the service that you provide. So let me just, in fairness, I think it's important as we're talking about this to understand, I mean, I understand that the crypto industry isn't asking for a tax exemption, but as Senator Warren was pointing out, there is a delay in when you pay your taxes under this sort of potential scenario. And of course, there's a benefit to deferral of your taxes. Could you just talk a bit about that and what that looks like?
Well, if you don't have to pay tax today, then you have an advantage because you're basically getting a tax subsidy.
Right. You delay, and then you get a benefit as a result of that delay.
That's
right.
Correct.
That's the way I see it too. I also want to get at this. I think there's a bit of a misconception about this idea that sort of anybody can mine or stake cryptocurrency. I remember when this was just getting off the ground a few years ago, and there was like the image of the kid in their basement with a computer doing mining. But in reality today, both mining and staking are highly competitive. Is that right? And they require often big chunks of capital in order to do this. Am I right about that?
That's true, although small participants are able to participate through partnerships or joint ventures or through Coinbase.
You might end up pooling or in some way coming together in order to participate. But I mean, it just seems to me that it seems to me that if you are allowing for a deferral of paying taxes, that is a way of actually benefiting the big guys just as much as it's benefiting, and maybe probably more than the little person who's trying to get going here. I mean, is that how you see this? I mean, most of the benefit here is going to the big guys.
Well, the benefit is going to be going where the capital is. And
right.
The capital is going to be with big.
Exactly.
The big guys.
Exactly.
So yes, that's true.
Exactly. Ms. Nellen, I have a question for you. And this has been, I know that folks have been talking about this on the committee today. Under the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, taxpayers with at least $50,000 in certain foreign financial assets need to report them on their tax return, right? But however, there's some questions about if these requirements would extend to digital assets. If Americans don't report on their foreign assets, of course, it makes it a lot easier for them to avoid paying taxes. So my question is this: if it's relatively easy for U.S. investors to get around geographic restrictions and to trade on foreign crypto exchanges or transact with foreign crypto wallets, if we take that into consideration, how should we be thinking about these reporting requirements to eliminate that incentive, that perverse incentive?
Yeah, I think part of it ties to the IRS clarifying the guidance as to what's considered a foreign financial asset that would be reported under that FATCA rule. To be explicit, when would your digital asset, which is just out there in the ether, when would it be considered a foreign asset? Because it's being acquired from a foreign exchange. So I think just more clarification on that would make sure it was reported. I'm guessing some of that actually is getting reported by practitioners and taxpayers today, but I think just more clarity from the IRS on what would fall under there.
Right. Less clarity equals more opportunity to avoid.
Or just overlooking it. People just might, I think sometimes people might not even be aware that they've got a foreign, or the preparer might not be asking the questions because of the complexity of how they might own these assets.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank my colleague, Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much. This is, I'm going to make an off-topic comment and then an on-topic comment. The off-topic comment is because the elephant in the capital city today is that our Republican colleagues and the president have shut down the U.S. government as of last night. And they've done so for a really extraordinary reason, which is to take away Americans' affordable care health benefits. The Affordable Care Health benefits don't just land in Democrat states, they land in Republican states. Polling shows that Republicans want, real live voting Republicans want, the Affordable Care benefits to be extended. So all we're asking is that Republicans do something that they should be doing anyway because it's the right thing to do and because it will benefit their own constituents and because their own constituents actually want it. That shouldn't be a hell of an ask. But it's an ask that is apparently so awful to Republicans that they'll shut down the government instead of sitting down and talking with us about solving that problem. This is a very significant cost problem for my state. I know it's not the focus of this hearing, but this is the first hearing we've had since Republicans put us into shutdown, and I can't not discuss that elephant in the room. We're not shutting down and cutting health care benefits. Republicans are shutting down to cut health care benefits. There's an off-ramp as wide as the world to solve this. All they have to do is agree that maybe just a moment's bipartisanship and solving a real problem for real constituents should be the order of the day. The other cost issue that I want to raise that is relevant to these proceedings, and I hope folks out there from crypto, AI, and data center world are listening, is the cost problem of electric bills. We could solve a lot of the problems that AI, crypto, and big data centers are causing if this industry, which is going to make billions and billions of dollars, I feel like Carl Sagan there, billions and billions of dollars, would simply do the responsible thing and bring its own clean energy to the grid with it. That ought not to be asking too much. The choice not to do that and to simply dump this added demand onto the grid has a very predictable effect. When you add all that demand to a fixed supply, what happens? Prices go up. That's supply and demand, the elementary theory of market economics. So all of these new facilities are going to be driving electric utility bills up for regular customers. And I hope the industry will think about, I mean, I get that you've got this huge political runway with the Trump administration, and you can basically go raiding and pirating through the political world right now. But at some point, you know, you only get one chance to make a first impression. And if your first impression to the world is, we're not going to take care of our own energy supply, instead we're going to drop into your grid and make all of your electric rates go up by a ton because we're not willing to be responsible, you're going to have to live with that for the rest of this industry's life. And then it's not just added demand for fixed supply. This administration is trying to damage electric supply by taking out the clean energy sources that provided 95% of the new additions to the grid last year. For an industry that needs more electrons to sit quietly on its hands while an administration that it virtually controls on everything having to do with crypto and AI destroys the clean energy sources that can provide those electrons, I don't get it. That makes no sense. But it makes that supply-demand price increase to regular Americans way, way worse. Because now you're not just adding huge new demand onto the grid, you're also pinching off the real supply that's waiting and that is out there. And the last point I'll make, if you'll forgive me for one more minute, is that we are verging on having very serious climate-related economic catastrophes. I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but look no further than the Florida home insurance market. Look no further than the warnings about what happens when the insurance markets collapse, mortgages are not available, property values collapse, and you have a 2008-style meltdown because we aren't taking climate change seriously, but the insurance industry has to, and banks have to, and that's where this leads. So when this gets ugly, which it will, and this industry has shown up and not been responsible about bringing its own clean energy to the grid, and instead is loading up not only on electric prices for everybody else around them, but also requiring more polluting units to be brought back online to meet their demand, worsening the climate situation, there's going to be a reckoning. And I just urge whoever is listening, who is making decisions and policy and plans for this industry, think about what you're doing to regular consumers of electricity nearby. Think about why you would want to not help the clean energy industry provide you the electrons you need, and think why you would want to drive us backwards on the perilous climate path we're on, because that's what you're doing right now. Thank you.
I thank my colleague, and I want to associate myself with your important remarks as well. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would say to our panel, of course, you have no saying at all over what Senator Whitehouse just bored you with. And I appreciate that you all are here to talk about digital assets and how we're going to examine the taxation of digital assets. And I think that during the Biden administration, what we saw was government weaponization against cryptocurrencies with things like Operation Choke Point 2.0. And we had regulators that didn't understand cryptocurrencies, and they were unfavorable to them because they didn't have any control over them. So what I would like to hear from you all is what you think are the most important priorities to include in crypto tax law so that we continue to lead in crypto investments and innovation. If you want to very briefly give me a statement and then submit in writing what that priority would be, that is fine with me. But we'll just start right here and go straight down.
Yeah, so thank you, Senator. My written testimony lays out the three areas that we're most focused on at Coin Center. I'll just briefly touch on one, which is addressing how staking and mining rewards are taxed. We've talked about it today at the hearing a good amount, but I think that recognition of exactly how the technology works and that the fact that this is property that's being created by these stakers and miners is a really important issue to kind of democratizing these networks in the way that they were intended to be.
Okay. Ms. Kramer?
Well, I would think that one of the key priorities has not been really talked about yet, except in the context of source, which is that we want to make the United States a magnet for foreign investment.
Yeah.
We have to be much clearer as to what our rules are, because so that they can understand whether they're subject to tax or not. And that discourages investment when you don't know.
Yeah. Mr. Lankin?
Thank you, Senator. We outlined 10 points that we thought, and I spoke about that in my remarks and also in my written testimony. I think what we're really focused on is just rules of the road itself. So I think we don't have that right now. So, and that is what Lisa gave us
Senator
mentioned.
Lummis and I are trying to get there with it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
So, there are a variety of different aspects of that sourcing rules, parity with financial services and digital asset lending, asset management, encouraging investment in the U.S., clarifying staking, grantor trust for ETFs. Again, every time we invent something new or do something different, it creates more pressure on the system, and we just do not have rules of the road to do that. So,
well, and the grantor trust are an issue in that. Ms. Nellen?
So far as the concept of a digitally, digital assets posted on an exchange, there are various places, mark to market, lending, qualified appraisals, where rules are needed actually in the tax law to make that clear. Quickly coming back to the staking activity here, I think a lot of it does depend on who is actually doing the staking. Is this a small investor? Is it a big company? The question had come up, what if the IRS had just pulled the revenue ruling? I think many taxpayers would still look at, did I receive something? Is it on my records? And they would probably report that, assuming they could figure out what the value was, then track that. And they might even want to do that because from that point forward, if it goes up, they're going to have a capital gain as opposed to ordinary income. And also there's some differences in how it's categorized on the staking. Is it creating an asset? Is it instead receiving something that has a bearing on expenses you incurred in that? If you're creating the asset, goes into the basis. If you're in an investment activity and you have the expense, it is not going to be deductible to
Well,
the
and we want
individual
those
taxpayer.
here. We don't want them offshore. And so, yes, we need to work toward that. Mr. Samansato, am I pronouncing your name right?
Yeah.
Okay, wanted to be sure about that. Nashville in Tennessee is really a very friendly crypto state and a friendly crypto city. There's a Bitcoin Park that is in Nashville. And what we have seen is that many of our small businesses now will accept a cryptocurrency as payment. The problem we're running into is should that cup of coffee be a taxable event? And the de minimis issue. So I'd like for you to speak for just a moment. My time has expired now, but speak for a moment about de minimis.
No, I can be real brief. I think it's an important area to bring, as you mentioned, the individual users who you want to engage with this technology into a situation where it's not super complex. One of the topics that's come up is the fact that you would still need to track, your spending in order to figure out if you're able to get that de minimis exemption. But I think as you talk about like paying $5 for a cup of coffee or paying a fraction of a cent for a transaction fee, those aren't something that would need to, a deep analysis of whether you fall under the $200 exemption. And so I think that exemption really does lead to the benefit of these individual users in the network.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackman. We have now concluded the first round. Senator Wyden has another question that he would like to ask, and then we will wrap up, and I'll thank you all at that time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We haven't gotten into the question of the tax gap associated with this topic, and according to the IRS, the tax gap is nearly $700 billion per year, and that these provisions don't even include taxes on digital assets because the IRS doesn't have visibility into that sector. And I think you all were here when I mentioned Chuck Reddick's comments on the tax gap already. And if the digital asset rules are unclear, it seems to me taxpayers are going to resolve ambiguities in their favor if there is confusion about this. So let's just go down the row, and I would be interested in your assessment of whether I'm correct that that's what taxpayers would do, and would clarifying the rules raise revenue, and try to get each of you, our experts on this subject, get your thoughts on revenue, because I think this is a big part of the debate, and Chuck Reddick certainly lit things up earlier, and now we've got to get down to the nuts and bolts of where we go from here. Why don't we just start on the left and go down to the right?
Yeah, so thank you, Senator. I definitely think that clarifying these areas that we've talked about today is going to lead to a revenue raise, right? This is an incredibly complex topic, as we've talked about, and in a lot of cases, again, you're talking about individual users of these networks that need the guidance to be able to figure out what their tax liability is, otherwise they're kind of guessing at this. So.
Major amounts of revenue?
That I don't have a good sense. I'd have to...
Okay, I'm waiting for somebody who's going to define the numbers too. Ms. Kramer.
Well, starting with the estimate and the numbers, I have no clue as to what the gap might be, but nobody has a clue, primarily because the data is not available. And we don't really have a tracking of the cryptocurrency numbers the way that we do have tracking of all the other financial markets. So that's something that we could benefit from if there was more official tracking. As to... and now I forgot the last part.
No, I think I wanted to get your sense of whether it sounded right in terms of taxpayers resolving ambiguities in their favor. And then if you agree with that, what it would mean to clarify the rules. And if any of you want to make additional news today, you can lay out some potential numbers.
Obviously, if you don't have a rule that you have to follow, then you're going to interpret it in your favor. That's just the way it's done.
Thank you, Senator. I totally endorse what you said, that gamesmanship is encouraged by inadequate rules and by lack of clarification, and that's why we're here today. I think we need legal changes to help clarify that. That's an important building block for a compliant tax system. At Coinbase, we pride ourselves really on encouraging our taxpayers to comply with the laws. We have an entire module and help center to try and encourage people to do that. We've endorsed the broker reporting rules. We're building an entire framework with that will report transactions. I would just encourage, though, that each member in the Senate consider administrability in the course of doing that, because this is one asset class that is so democratized that we are talking about billions of transactions. And so what I would encourage the Senate to consider is administrability for over-reporting, for low-value reporting, and even what we call the de minimis transaction. So if you require taxpayers to report 1/4 cent of gain or loss, I just don't know that they're really chasing where the revenue really is. Should be chasing bigger transactions. Again, if you're requiring that stablecoins, all stablecoin transactions will be reported, you're going to be deluged with billions of zero-value reporting, which to me doesn't encourage the administrability of the system, encourage fairness, and it really doesn't create a system that actually works. It will creak under disrepair. The IRS is unprepared. I think the IRS is probably unprepared today to endure or to absorb the amount of information that Coinbase alone will be providing. We're going to be testing that in a little while. So again, let's create a fair system. Let's create rules for the road. We've outlined 10 points where we think we can encourage this industry to grow within the United States. So let's do that. Let's prevent brinkmanship and gamesmanship. But when we create that system, let's also create an administrable system that works.
Ms. Nellen.
Yeah, no idea what the tax gap figure could be, but certainly there's legitimate activity, and just like with cash, there's other things that people might be doing intentionally. Certainly, I think clear rules and anything that can be done to help get more information out, whether from the IRS to explain how all these transactions work, where they have tax obligations. They've got a lot of information out, but a lot of it's not like unique to crypto. It might just be, well, go see this publication on property in general, which might not always help answer the question. So, because any resources that can help in getting more tax education out there would be good. And again, as noted earlier, I think actually just getting a legislation passed will draw attention to, oh, I need to understand better my tax considerations here. But I think good reminders to folks that if you had sale or exchange transactions, whether or not it shows up on a 1099 DA, you still have reporting obligations. I think we can learn from existing areas where people are not aware. For example, a lot of people don't know that it's income even if you don't get a 1099 or a W-2, and that just grows with more kinds of transactions that don't get reported. And there are going to be a lot of transactions that don't fall into the current reporting for centralized exchanges. So people are going to need to know, you need to keep your records, understand tax consequences, and get those reported. Then so far as people engaged in, if they're going to be bad actors, they're going to be bad actors probably with cash or with digital assets, and just ways to have enforcement funded to help address some of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You want to make any further statements?
All right, thank you very much, and that does wrap up the questioning. Once again, I want to thank our witnesses for not only appearing before us today and the information you were able to provide us in response to questions, but your written testimony. It is and will be extremely helpful to us. As is evidenced this morning, there's a strong bipartisan foundation on the taxation of digital assets, and I look forward to continuing my work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to ensure that our tax code provides a clear framework for American leadership in this innovative industry. With that in mind, I remind my colleagues that the deadline for submitting any questions for the record is 5 p.m. on Wednesday, October 8th. You should expect to get some additional questions for the record, and we welcome your additional information in response to that. And with that, this committee stands adjourned. Thank you again for your help today.
Thank you.
Thank you.